everybody. Thank you for joining today to hear from the communications team. I'm Marian Starkey. I'm the Vice President for Communications here at Population Connection. We've got two of our great comms staff here on this panel as well. Hannah Evans, who you've heard from many times before, probably. She often moderates the talks that we do virtually, and also did a 4-part demography series over the summer. So Hannah's here. And then Olivia, I think most of you probably have not met. Olivia Nader comes to us from Population Matters in the UK. She started working here in May and has taken on the role of communications manager. Has done a lot of great work for us since joining, mostly written work. So we've got a much more active blog and press release section than we've ever had before, thanks to her. So I just wanted to run through how this hour is hopefully going to look. Hannah is going to talk a little bit about the new as of July UN population projections and the 8 billion milestone, which is coming up in just, well, less than 2 weeks now, and what that sort of means for our world. And then I'm going to run through some of the communications products that we've developed and sent out to various newspapers around the country, and then things that we have planned to go live on November 15th, which is the 8 billion milestone on our website. And then Olivia is going to walk us through some communications do's and don'ts when talking about population issues and challenges. And we'll also talk a little bit about engaging directly with reporters, which she has endeavored to do quite a bit since starting here. And then we're hoping to open it up for a conversation, hoping that some of you have experience submitting op-eds and letters to the editor to your local papers. And if so, hear any tips that you have for other people who maybe haven't done that before. And we will we'll go from there, and hopefully it'll turn into an interesting Q&A. So to get us started off, let's hear from Hannah about our world of 8 billion.
All right, thank you, Marian, and thank you, Steph. Hi, everyone. So great to see you all again. Thanks so much for joining. As Marian mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. I'm just going to take us through some of the major updates from the most recent UN population projections that were submitted by the UN. And I'm going to talk about them, obviously, as they relate to us and our work. So I'm going to be looking at some of the major updates within the context of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. And we also have a few interactive polls ready for you today, so get ready for those. First and foremost, I just wanted to take us through some of the major updates, as I said. As many of you are well aware, this year, in a few weeks actually, we're set to reach 8 billion people. So one of the stats that I use to kind of describe how big of a deal this is to look historically and to recognize that up until 1800, it took all of human history to reach 1 billion people. Now we're adding 1 billion people to the planet every 11 to 12 years. So that's what happened this last period. And we're now going to reach 8 billion people by 2022. The latest projections also show that the global population could grow to 8.5 billion in 2030, 9.7 by 2050, and 10.4 by 2100. That's according to the medium variant projection, so it could change according to development, whether or not people gain access to resources like healthcare and education, and of course, climate change, which is not actually included in the projections for the UN. Of note as well is the fact that India is projected to surpass China as the world's most populous country in 2023, so next year. Our recent magazine article has a whole section on that, in addition to the 8 billion milestone, so be sure to check that out if you haven't already. And as we talk about often, countries in sub-Saharan Africa are continuing to grow and will likely continue to grow into 2100, thus contributing over half of the global population increase through 2050. And I'm going to go to the next page. So, Marion, could we set up one of the first polls, please? Just to give us kind of a better understanding of how big of a number 8 billion is. I want us all to take a look at this question and please answer when you can. It says, how many days, weeks, months, or years is 8 billion seconds? The first is 253.68 years. Question B, or answer B, is 105.34 years. Answer C is 345.68 days. And D is 50.23 years. Take a second and please answer that question according to what you think. It's pretty surprising to me, actually, to learn the answer.
We've got a lot of answers coming in. We're at about 50% now. Just give it another moment for reading off the results. Okay, it looks like it's starting to slow down. So 44% of people got the answer right. It's 253.68 years. That's how many seconds that takes, or 8 billion seconds.
Right.
Takes, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really hard to even conceptualize how big of a number 1 billion is. But if we were to count every second to 1 billion, it would take 32 years. And if we were to count every second to 8 billion, it would take well over 2 lifetimes, right? So this is a huge, huge number with really big implications, obviously, in social, economic, and environmental terms. But also just a really amazing milestone. We've got 8 billion people on this planet. Okay, I'm going to exit out of that. Is the poll going away for you? Marion?
I keep clicking to stop sharing, and there it goes. I think it's gone now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of population and development, which is a lot of what I talk about in presentations, it's important to understand, and this isn't necessarily new, but it's something that we're really focusing on within our outreach and education programs, is that the 46 least developed countries in the entire world, the most low-income places, are among the fastest growing. And that's, as we know, because there's a really tight and direct correlation between fertility rates and poverty, and also high fertility rates and high unmet needs for contraception. Many places in this area, so sub-Saharan Africa in particular, are projected to double in population between now and 2050. In terms of development, this presents a lot of problems in terms of resource allocation, food production, and access to social resources like healthcare and education. And in terms of climate change, this really also puts a lot of pressure on natural resources and exacerbates the impacts of climate vulnerability. Oh, sorry, guys. So over half of the increase in global population is going to occur in just 8 countries, and 9 out of the 10 most climate vulnerable countries are going to be in sub-Saharan Africa, which is going to double in population by 2050. So what we want to really highlight here is the fact that, again, because there's a direct correlation between population growth and development, and also population growth and climate vulnerability, we've got a real concentration of issues around the world. We've got a concentration of places that have low income status, that have high climate vulnerability, that have high, that have low status of women and high unmet needs for contraceptives. So in these regions, especially that are growing very quickly amongst a rapidly changing climate, we need to make sure that we're working to increase access to family planning services, to reproductive health care, and to education overall through the empowerment of women. The IPCC 6th assessment report, one of the most recent ones that came out, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is again just kind of substantiating what we were just saying about the correlations between population growth and vulnerability, recognizing that climate vulnerability is not just a factor of the environment and of geographic susceptibility to climate change, but it's also very interwoven into intersecting issues like socioeconomic development, unequal access to resources, marginalization, historical and ongoing patterns of inequity, things that relate very closely to histories of colonialism and exclusion, right? Approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And many of these places, again, are also the fastest growing. Oh. And again, just this is a graph that I've shown before, but we really want to kind of drive home the very direct correlations, again, between population growth and climate change risk, recognizing that the higher the population growth, the more population density, the more risks that people are in for experiencing climate impacts that are more severe and more acute. And, you know, in response to all of this, we want to kind of just recognize and sort of fuse together the links between climate change and development and population growth and gender equity. Climate change is something that is not only environmental in scope, but that disproportionately affects particular groups, especially those who are marginalized, and also especially women and girls throughout the world. Women and girls are at much higher risk for experiencing climate impacts. And although men are also impacted as well, women and girls are collectively poorer and more directly dependent on climate sensitive resources for sustenance and livelihoods. And they're also subject to things like patriarchal social structures, which leave women with less mobility, education, healthcare, and other vital resources. They're also largely excluded from decision-making processes, which exacerbates the impacts of these issues as well. So as solutions, we're just kind of highlighting the fact that gender equity can be included as a climate solution. We can look at, for example, the production of agriculture and see that there are a lot of gaps that exist within the production of food. Women produce 60 to 80% of food in lower income countries, and yet they have disproportionately low access to resources like land rights, credit and capital, technology, or training in comparison to men. And because of that, they end up producing less food. Research from Project Drawdown, which is an organization that we reference often that ranks different solutions to climate change based off of various indicators, estimates that closing these gaps by creating more equity within these processes could yield farm yields that are much higher. They could rise by up to 30% if these gender gaps were closed. Continued population growth is really presenting a lot of problems with food security, the ability to produce food, the availability of arable land, and so on. And so by closing these gender gaps, we can simultaneously produce more food on less land, and also, in theory, kind of contribute to lower amounts of deforestation because less amounts of land will be needed. Education is also a very important aspect of reaching the 8 billion milestone and making sure that slower population growth is occurring in places that need it most. And right now, 130 million girls worldwide are denied the basic human right to attend school. Education is obviously a very fundamental aspect of individual and community development and yields a variety of benefits to society, including better health outcomes, more financial stability, better agency and autonomy, and more ability to adapt to climate change. And finally, this is my last slide here. Family planning should be recognized as well as a climate solution, especially in the wake of such rapidly increasing global population numbers. And in low to middle income countries alone, 218 million women who want to avoid pregnancy are not currently using any modern forms of contraception. This results in lower development outcomes and lower status of women, lower economic outputs, and much higher climate vulnerability. So we need to recognize and begin to kind of better integrating this solution into environmental circles, into climate change conversations. to recognize that it's not only a human rights obligation and a precursor to sustainable development, but also something that's very necessary to include as a climate solution as well. And we can do the rest of the poll questions, Marion, if you want, or we can go into you and you can listen.
I just launched the second one. See if you
All
can
right.
get this answer right.
Okay, so it says, when does the UN project that we'll reach 9 billion people? In 2037, 2050, 2075, or 2105? Take a minute to answer this. Looks like most people are getting it right here. All right, so we've got 48% of, actually 50% of respondents who got this answer right. So the UN projects that we're going to reach 9 billion people in 2037. So good job for those of you who got it right. The second most popular answer was 2050, which is not too far off. But 2037 is whenever we're going to likely reach 9 billion people. Should we do the last poll question?
Did you want me to launch the other one? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. We can just do the last one and then we'll
Sure.
take it over. All right, last poll question, everyone. It says, how many countries are projected to decrease in population by 1% or more in 2050? We wanted to make sure to include this one to highlight some of the hope that exists within these projections as well. So the first answer is 9. Answer 2 is 10. Answer 3 is 20. And answer 4 is 61. So again, how many countries are projected to decrease in population by 1% or more by 2050? We'll give it about 30 more seconds here. Go ahead and answer according to what you think. And I think this is the answer to this question might be a little surprising to a lot of people. So the answer is 61. So we're going to have 61 countries that are going to decrease in population by 1% or more in 2050. So we've got a lot of kind of stark warnings for the future with regards to the population projections, to climate change, to inequity, and so on. But this is a really positive indicator, right? We've also got 2/3 of countries around the world that are projected to reach replacement level fertility. That's right, Marion, right?
I think it's that 2/3 of people on Earth live in a country that has below replacement fertility. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I was wondering if I was going to get that right or not. So yeah, that's also providing a lot of hope. Things are moving in a positive direction. Development is occurring in ways that are reducing mortality and increasing access to resources and slowing population growth. The big questions for us are how are we going to deal with this within the context of global inequality, and can we address this issue in enough time to avert the worst of climate change? So thanks for playing, everyone. That was fun. And Marianne, let's kick it over to you.
Okay, so now we want to talk about what we can do to make this information known to other people who aren't already involved in this movement. And one of the things that we did, and I think that some of you will want to have this as a resource too, because of one of the pre-submitted questions that we received, which was whether we had any resources available to help people formulate op-eds or letters to the editor that they might want to send in to their local newspapers. So I wanted to share, can you see, does it say 8 billion major milestone? Okay, so this is an editorial memo that we put together and sent out through Prowly, which Olivia can talk a little bit more about. It's basically a distribution service that we can use to reach many journalists and editors around the country, depending on what beats they cover. Yeah. So we sent this out to about 335 journalists and editors.
Hey, I'm gonna send you. I just got
Thanks. Yeah, so we sent this to about 335 journalists and editors with the hope that they would write about this population milestone when it occurs, and they would have the data in their hands to use to create something that is actually useful to people who are reading the newspaper. And that's a little bit of a jab at some of the articles that came out around the 7 billion milestone. And I've got a slide that I'll share about that in a minute. But yeah, so we just kind of walk through, you know, why we commemorate the population milestones, some myths surrounding population, consequences of population growth, which everybody on this meeting is very familiar with. How do we stabilize population? Obviously through increased access to modern forms of contraception for everybody who wants them. And then we included a history of the past milestones, just so that people, this speaks to what Hannah mentioned earlier, that it took all of human history to reach 1 billion people. And then if you look at this column on the right, you can see that that number of years gets shorter and shorter and shorter as the milestones go on. So these are some graphics that we had created for this event, so that we would have something custom to send out to editors to hopefully include in their newspapers. So you can see this is the J curve, that's what it's called because it makes the shape of a J. This is 12,000 years of population history. And you know, you can see how it just spiked in the last couple of 100 years. This is a little bit more in the weeds, but we did want to include something about why population growth occurs. So this describes what the natural increase is, which is just births minus deaths, and then the stages of the demographic transition theory and what population pyramids are and what they look like. It's basically the age structure of a population, which changes pretty drastically from very young to more balanced between the ages. As it progresses, as the country progresses through the transition. So anyway, this is something that I am going to share in the chat so that anybody here who feels like they might want to write something to submit to their local newspaper can use this as a resource, and we would love it if you did. Okay, and then let's see, I guess I'll share. So this is what I was talking about with some of the less than amazing news coverage that we got for the 7 billion. We saw a lot of this. The world welcomes baby 7 billion. The world's 7 billionth baby is born. It's just very, you know, whatever. It's very gimmicky. There are more useful ways, we believe, to cover a huge demographic event like this, especially talking about the consequences of what it means for a population to grow by 1 billion people every dozen years or so. And this is a collection of the rest of the articles that I was able to find that came out on October 31st, 2011, which was the day that we commemorated the 7 billion milestone. This is it. So you can see NPR did a little bit of a series. So they've got 2 articles and a podcast here. You've got kind of an opinion piece on Grist, another opinion piece on Wired, Forbes, I think that was another opinion piece. Yeah, something in the Christian Science Monitor, and then the New York Times. And other than that, papers didn't even write about this event. So we're hoping that that changes with this coming milestone. And hang on, okay. And that newspapers will cover it in a way that actually gives people some information about demography and how it applies to their lives and to the planet. And so we wanted to go through and give some tips if you are thinking about writing something. And I guess I should mention too, we have written an op-ed. We have submitted it. We submitted it about 8 days ago to the San Diego Union Tribune. Our vice president for marketing lives in San Diego, and we had her submit it in her name. Normally, you have to be a local resident of wherever the newspaper is located in order to get published. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about where you might want to submit your work. And so we're still waiting to hear back. They said they were considering it. And if they decide not to accept it, we'll send it on to somewhere else. And, you know, so the process goes. So first tip is just making sure that whatever you're writing about is current. It's connected to something that's actually happening in the world right now. And if it's not, it's probably not going to get published. So that could be, you know, anything from like publishing a book and wanting to talk about it, or you know, something that's in the news, such as this will hopefully be. And then I already mentioned, you know, submitting locally is important. Usually, I should mention one of the ways that we've been able to place op-eds in places around the country is by enlisting the help of members. And so we'll work directly with a member who lives in a certain city and tailor the op-ed to where they live, you know, include data and statistics that are specific to that community, and then have the donor submit the op-ed in their name. And we had really great success with this last year in the summer of 2021, when we were doing kind of a media blitz around the birth dearth, the baby bust that was getting a lot of attention at the time. So yeah, also mention your subscriber if you are. I think that goes a long way. And then you want to be compliant with the outlet's submission guidelines. So when you go to the newspaper's guidelines page, it will tell you what the maximum word count is, how to submit your op-ed. So most of the time they don't want to receive attachments. They want you to copy and paste the body of your work into an email and just send the email without an attachment. They're going to ask for your address, probably ask for your phone number just to verify that you are who you say you are. They might get in touch with you and ask you some clarifying questions. One thing that we've found is really helpful to editors is including hyperlinks to citations. That saves them time. And, you know, everybody's looking to save time. So if we can do part of their job for them, that is always very much appreciated. So I would encourage anything that you submit to have hyperlinked sources in it already, because otherwise they're probably just going to reach out to you and ask, like, what is the source for this? So you might as well just save that step. And then finally, most papers that are larger require exclusivity. So that means that you can't just send one piece of writing to 5 different local papers, hoping that one of them will publish it or that all of them will publish it. Likely, they will want to know that they are the only outlet that you sent this to. And so that is something to keep in mind. And that's exactly what we're sort of dealing with now. You know, you have to wait. You have to give them like a week to decide whether or not they want to publish it. And then if they don't, then of course you're cleared to submit it somewhere else. But yeah, unless you see that they do not require exclusivity, don't submit it to more than one place at a time, because that could harm your chances of getting it published in any of those places. And then for letters to the editor, this is something that comes after. So we won't be writing letters to the editor in the lead up to the 8 billion milestone, but we will be likely writing them in the aftermath. So depending on what articles get published on November 15th, we will have responses to that, and maybe you will too. And if you do, you should send them in. So most letters to the editor do have to be a response to something that has already been published in that newspaper. And they want to receive those letters within a week of the original publication. So don't sit on it. If you read something and you think it requires a response, write it out and send it in. One of the most challenging things I find about writing letters to the editor is that they tend to need to be very short. The maximum word count is often something like 150 words, which is like 2 very short paragraphs. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. I think for my local newspaper, the Portland Press Herald, it's like 250 words, but still very short. You want to get right to the point, and yeah, hope that you get in print. And then I just wanted to mention that Stephanie has created a great page on our website. The link is down at the bottom, but I'll also put it in, or somebody will put it in the chat. And it has all of these resources on the page. So if you want more than what we offered in the editorial memo, you can find more information on, blog posts. Hannah's been interviewed a couple of times by podcasts, and the links to those are on that page. We'll have a press release when November 15th comes around. We already have a press release for World Population Day, which happened in July. That was the day that the date of the 8 billion milestone was announced. So we kind of have already written about this a couple of months ago, but doing it again. And then, yeah, it links to the September issue of the magazine as well. So I think that's all I'll say for now, because I want to make sure we have time to hear from Olivia. And then after she is done speaking, we'll open it up for questions. And we do have, like I said, we have pre-submitted questions, and we'll try to get to the ones that we haven't already answered in conversation. So Olivia, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to finally meet you all. So I will try to be quick so that we have enough time for questions, because we got quite a few questions in advance as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so I'm just going to talk quickly about some of the comms do's and don'ts when it comes to the population issue. So there are some terms and phrases that we stay away from just because they create a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation. So one example is the term population control. So even though this used to be just the standard way of talking about managing population size, or like trying to slow population growth, it's now become associated with coercive methods. So like coercive population control methods like China's one-child policy and things like forced sterilization. It just brings up a lot of negative connotation in some people's minds, which is why we never use the term. Instead, you can use things like end population growth, stabilize the population or population stabilization, or achieve a sustainable population. Those are all more positive. We also stay away from any kind of dehumanizing terms for human procreation. We never say things like breed or breeding when we're talking about people having children. So just don't go there, because it's not nice, and people will immediately assume that you're misanthropic and hate people. So just say having kids, having children. Another one that's not so obvious is educate girls. So in my experience, this causes a lot of misunderstanding. It's misinterpreted frequently in two ways. Because some people are not aware of the education gender gap. They don't realize that a lot fewer girls than boys have access to education. They think that when you talk about educating girls, you're neglecting boys. But of course, boys need education too. So that's not what that's about. The other way this is frequently misinterpreted is people think that when you say educate girls, you're talking about teaching girls about responsible family planning, which would essentially imply that we're placing the blame for rapid population growth on girls and women. So that's why it's best not to say educate girls. It's better to talk about removing barriers to girls' education. So you're making it clear that currently girls are struggling to access education. So you're trying to remove those barriers to enable all girls to go to school. I also like to remove barriers in relation to family planning, because we don't want people to think that we're just talking about sending people condoms. That's not how slowing population growth works. The main reasons that people don't use contraception are often unrelated to physical access. Often it's other things like gender inequality and patriarchal norms that basically prevent women from using contraception. So removing barriers to family planning is often a better way of talking about the issue than saying provide family planning. Another thing to avoid is to claim that population growth is the only problem. It's not. It is a root driver of all our environmental crises, but there are other problems as well. Overconsumption in high income countries is a really big one that we shouldn't neglect, especially because we're part of that high consuming group. So it's really important to acknowledge that people like us also bear a lot of responsibility for the environmental crisis, especially climate change. Most of historical emissions have been created by wealthy nations. So when you talk about the population issue, just be sure that you also acknowledge other drivers of environmental degradation. And then finally, try to avoid being really pessimistic. I know that the scale of our environmental crises is really quite overwhelming, and sometimes it can be really depressing, and it's hard to be hopeful if you're aware of all the facts of the reality of our environmental crises. But it's really important not to be too pessimistic when you're talking to other people, because that can just make them shut down. They just won't listen anymore, just because it's too overwhelming, and like they'll feel like, okay, well, what's the point of even trying? Like, there's nothing I can do. So try to always convey a sense of hope, because there always is hope, and action is always better than apathy. So make it clear that there are really positive, empowering ways to slow population growth, and that there's so much we can and still need to do in order to build a better future. And then just a more general kind of tip when you're talking about the issue, especially when you're dealing with people who are likely to be population skeptics, or who who you think are likely to disagree with you. It's always a good idea to lead with empowering solutions, because nobody will disagree with that. So for example, if I talk about my work, I won't say I work for an organization that is trying to end population growth, and leave it at that, because many people will automatically think, oh God, this person is a eugenicist, or this person hates people, or that kind of thing. So instead, I would say something like, I work for an organization that is trying to improve access to family planning and education and international investment in reproductive rights, to help slow population growth and solve our environmental issues. So just make it sound like, we're doing good stuff, which we are. You don't want to give people that opportunity to automatically assume that your work is somehow negative. Okay, so that's my short little list. And back to you, Marianne.
Okay, well, we've got a little bit less than 20 minutes. And so we have a ton of questions collected, but I guess I would really like to hear from people that are here right now about what they have found. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call, which is coming through to my headset. Anyway, I'd like to hear from people who are here. If you have written anything or talked to anybody, or found that you have really broken through to anybody talking about these issues, we'd really like to just kind of open the floor and hear from you at this point. And you can just unmute yourself, I think. I think everybody can do that for themselves.
Marianne, should we launch the last two poll questions to get
Sure,
the conversation going?
Sure. All right, and there's no right answer to these. These are just kind of how do you feel?
One thing that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to add on about acknowledging other ways of helping out the environment, and overconsumption that always comes up. And my first approach is absolutely agree with them. Overconsumption is a huge issue, but trying to convince people to consume less. I apologize. Let me take care of the dogs here just for a second. I'll be back.
All right. Was there anybody else who wanted to pipe up while we're waiting for poll results to come in?
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. You're back.
With overconsumption, convincing people is really, really tough to buy less stuff and consume less stuff. And let's face it, in this society, people don't like being told what to do. But on the other hand, if you say, hey, we are here to make sure that every woman has the ability to have the number of babies they want, if they want them, when they want them, And by doing that, we are just empowering people to do what they already want to do. And just by getting rid of the huge number of unplanned pregnancies, upwards of 42%, you guys know that number better than I do, just by getting that number down much, much lower, population will go down. So try that on for size, empowering people to do what they want more than trying to tell them what they should be doing.
I think that's exactly right. And it goes back to what Olivia said about, people not being able to argue with that. Yeah, they're all very good points. Thank you. Does anybody else?
Yeah, this is Steve Olszewski in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I've done some speaking in my faith community on a topic that I call the growth dilemma. It's gone very well. It's really helped to open some people's eyes. But one of the surprising issues that I've heard back is that to some people, this sounds like a racist strategy, trying to keep nations in Africa, people of color, from increasing their populations so that white people can stay dominant. So I've been able to deal with that okay, but I just wanted to make others aware that that issue might pop up.
Yeah, that pops up for us regularly. One of the things that we like to talk about when that comes up is how frequently discussed overpopulation is in these fast growing nations. I mean, if you go to a family planning, like an international family planning conference or a demography conference, there are people from all over the world, lots of people from sub-Saharan Africa, talking about how population growth is, detrimental to their own ability to develop as a nation, and to the environments that they live in. I think, it's important to keep in mind, like Hannah said, I believe that, per capita consumption of carbon emissions is obviously much higher in wealthy countries, and maybe the carbon emissions of people who are living in those rapidly growing countries aren't as significant on a global scale, but their consumption of the resources, the natural resources where they live, is very significant for their own quality of life. And this isn't a matter of us telling them that. They know that. And they're the ones that are out there asking for grants from USAID to run these programs, these family planning programs. So yeah, I think that is something that you will certainly run up against. And yeah, it's good to have an answer to that. Thank you. I guess I can share the results of the poll. Let me try to unpin. There we go. Okay, so do you think awareness of the population issue has increased or decreased over the past 2 decades? And yeah, most people think it's increased. That's positive.
That is good.
Yeah, equal numbers think it decreased or that there hasn't been a change. Again, no right answer. I mean, we don't know. I don't know how you would measure this, but interesting thing to think about. Okay, can we hear from anybody else?
Yeah, I would like to ask you, when talking about population is growing in Africa, why do they not have the resources? Is it money because they don't have the resources to get contraceptives or whatever to their population? And if that's the problem, maybe it would be better off if the countries that do have the resources would be able to support them financially with that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that is actually the crux of our advocacy work. So we are currently, as a global community, underfunding international family planning by about $5.5 billion. And that's the figure that we are short for providing family planning to everybody who wants it, as they respond in surveys. And the United States fair share. It's called the fair share of that because of a commitment that we made back in 1994 at the International Conference on Population and Development, is $1.74 billion. That would be of the total, not of the 5.5, but of the total that's currently being spent and the additional amount that needs to be spent. And that's more than $1 billion more than we have been contributing for some time now. Our funding has been very stagnant, coming from the US, hovering at like $607 million for years. So again, that's like $1.1 billion less than we should be contributing based on commitments that we made as a nation. And the same is true for other donor countries as well. And then, national governments do also need to increase their spending on their own programs that they have running. But yeah, there's a major funding shortfall. And, it costs money to scale programs up, to scale up family planning programs so that they can reach people in the most rural areas, so that they can have a steady supply of contraceptives and not have, not be dealing with stockouts all the time, supply stockouts. And then of course it doesn't help when the largest family planning donor in the world, the United States, decides to implement policies that are really harmful to the clinics and the organizations abroad that would receive that money. So I'm talking about the global gag rule mostly, placing funding restrictions on organizations that either have to make a really difficult choice as to whether they're going to accept US funding and not provide comprehensive reproductive health care, or if they're going to go along with the stipulations of the global gag rule and not be able to provide their patients with care. So
I don't know what the global gag rule is. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so it's a policy that has been on and off implemented ever since Ronald Reagan, and it says that any foreign NGO that receives it's global health assistance now. It used to only be family planning assistance, but under Trump, it expanded to all global health assistance. Any organization that receives money from the United States government cannot offer abortion services, abortion referrals to other providers who could give patients those services, counseling on termination as a pregnancy option, even if they do all of that with their own non-US money, and even if abortion is legal where they live in their countries. So it's, a pretty undemocratic policy, us telling other countries what they can and can't do medically. So that's one of our big policy pushes, is to end the global gag rule through legislative repeal, whereas it's always been an executive action by whichever president is in the White House. We want it to be an act of Congress, because then it would be much more, it wouldn't flip-flop back and forth the way that it does now.
Okay.
And Marian, I just wanted to touch on that just briefly as well, to the question of why a lot of places in Africa don't have the resources necessary to expand access to family planning and healthcare. And to just be clear, a lot of places in Africa, in particular sub-Saharan Africa, are among the poorest on earth. There's many reasons for this, but the primary one, I think, would be histories of colonization and then present day economic colonization as well, that have made it really difficult for many countries to advance in terms of development or economics or otherwise. But also from a population perspective, usually the trajectory that a country undergoes involves populations within countries that have really high death rates, low life expectancy rates, and really high fertility rates. So people don't have access to resources. They're having babies. The babies are dying early. People aren't living very long because there's no access to healthcare, education, economic opportunity, and so on. But whenever governments are able to provide social services that help people transcend and lift out of poverty, that's whenever people are able to start controlling their own fertility through access to contraceptive, through voluntary family planning methods. And that's when population growth begins to slow. So it's very much dependent on whether or not people can gain access to resources. But as countries, so long as countries don't have this access, rapid population growth will likely occur. And whenever you have a really high amount and quickly growing amount of low income status people within a country, it makes it very difficult for societies and for governments to provide enough social services to help all of those people, while also knowing that most of the population itself is not really contributing in terms of consumption to economic growth, if that makes sense. So it's kind of this compounding issue that really necessitates advancements in healthcare and education and social services and resources, but that is made much more difficult with rapid population growth.
Sorry, Florence, I would just say something little, because I just saw someone asking, oh, and I'm an African, by the way, typical Ugandan, born and raised, although I'm living in the US right now. I just want to say, I just want to assure someone who was, concerned about racism. Obviously, what I've realized is that it's mostly white people who blame other white people, of being racist. But I think they are being selfish because, well, I'll show you my face. Because, oh, did I blur my background? I believe they are being a bit selfish because they have not lived in our countries. They're just working on assumptions. They don't know what's happening out there. They're not seeing the young girls and women who are really struggling and suffering, who are just chained to being child bearers. I had some people thinking about this in terms of climate change, and that's where the problem is. Everyone thinks it's just all about consumption, consumption, consumption. They never consider what's the problem behind the population growth. Who is behind population growth? To me, it's girls and women. We're the ones who are contributing to this, and we have high fertility rates, which people in the developed countries do not have. Most of the developing countries are replacement level fertility, some as low as 1, So it's so unfair to tell anyone who's trying to help people in my country that, oh, you're being a racist, or you want to end them. Have you guys been ended? You've been at lower fertility for ages. So why can't we get a chance as well as Africans, to reduce our fertility, to have opportunities at getting educated, to use contraceptives? And someone talked about contraceptives. Why aren't we using contraceptives anyway? There are so many barriers, actually, not just even funding, because sometimes you could have the funding, but then accessibility and then culture. So many things really are at play that negative, and we need to really deal with all of these. But just to reassure you that really don't mind the racism point. Obviously they are racists, that's a fact, they exist. We're not going to run away from that, and we have historical past which has been bad. But moving forward, people are promoting empowering solutions, and who doesn't want that? Honestly, I'm just tired of seeing women in villages, and moreover, we have so many rural areas. Like you find most African countries, the rural areas, they're like 80% people living in the rural areas. And a rural area in Africa is not a rural area in America. So you can imagine they have accessibility to health is just a problem. So if you're going to be pregnant, that's why we have a high maternal mortality rate. Many women are dying during childbirth, Many children are dying, they are born. And I saw someone saying, oh, are you pregnant? And when do you take time to eat? So we are giving birth to we have a lot of stillbirth as well. And then premature babies. So all of that really comes to play. I would love to see the population growth rate go down, because it's going to favor girls and women the most. Seriously. Sorry. I get passionate about this topic.
I can't imagine there's a better way to
Wonderful.
end this session. So thank you so much for speaking up. Yeah, it's always the best to hear from somebody who's from, the places that we're talking about, which, we try to do with our regularly scheduled speaker series, but that was perfect. That was the perfect way to end. So I do want to say that we do have a lot of questions that have been submitted, and I know that we haven't really answered any of them during this session, but we will answer them in writing, and we'll send that out in a follow-up email. So if you asked a question beforehand or in the chat box, be reassured we will answer it. Yeah, and I don't think I have anything else to say, but Stephanie, maybe, I don't know, do you want to get on and plug book club for next week?
Okay, yeah, so thank you, communications team. It was great to have you. So much is going on. To wrap up, as Marion was saying, we do have a book club meeting that's coming up. It will take place next Wednesday on the 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We will be discussing The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. This is a sci-fi novel, but it is eerily close to what our future might be if we don't take action against the climate crisis. So feel free to join us if you would like to listen or just share your thoughts. We will reach out with a wrap-up email, answers to the questions that were submitted today, a recording, presentation slides. So stay tuned. We will be in touch soon. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.